As the Justice Department admitting in court today that not every member of the grand jury saw the indictment before charges were filed against former FBI Director James Comey. Our chief legal correspondent, Katie Barlow, here with us in studio to break down where things stand in court for the former FBI Director. And wow, the judge really walking through exactly a lot of procedural errors that lead us to this point.
So it seems. I spoke with a former federal judge earlier today, and she suggested there were multiple procedural errors here. But let's walk it back and kind of start at the beginning. Today's hearing was about something called vindictive prosecution. Comey's team is trying to kick the case out, arguing that he's being vindictively prosecuted. And this is something Trump has actually argued before. When he was charged in the January 6th case, Trump said, I'm being vindictively prosecuted for exercising my right to free speech on January 6th when he gave that speech on the plaza and then took to social media. Vindictive prosecution is when a prosecutor charges you or ramps up charges for something you're perfectly legally allowed to do. So that's what Comey's team is arguing, that he is facing vindictive prosecution, in part from this Truth Social post, maybe we can put it up, Victoria, that Trump put out calling on his attorney general to go after Comey, saying Comey is guilty as hell. Why aren't you going after him? And also invoking Lindsay Halligan, who is now the interim U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. So that was today's hearing. But as you pointed out in the beginning, we got into a little bit more than that with the grand jury today.
Yeah, because it seemed as though to the vindictive prosecution, et cetera, there's also the legal ways that you get to an indictment, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And there is a procedure to press charges against someone that doesn't necessarily have to be, okay, probable cause, you're arrested, therefore. There's the grand jury indictment. But to get to the grand jury, things must be done right.
Right. So this all also goes back to the Constitution and the right to due process. We decide if we're going to take somebody's liberty away, send you to jail potentially, or charge you a bunch of money as a fine, we're going to make sure there are procedures in place and we do it correctly. And part of that's the grand jury. So typically a prosecutor goes before the grand jury, presents the evidence, and tries to convince them that there's probable cause that a crime was committed. Now, what we learned today is that the prosecutor, which we know was just Lindsay Halligan, she was the only one in the room there as a prosecutor, presented 3 charges to the grand jury. They declined to indict on one of them. They said that they issued what's called a true bill on the other 2. But then what is supposed to happen is you go back before the grand jury on just those 2, and you get perhaps a true bill, and then you send that up to the magistrate judge. What we learned today is that Lindsay Halligan presented the remaining 2 to the judge, and that is a procedural no-no. It's a problem. And I'll tell you what typically happens in an instance like that, speaking with former prosecutors, if you get a no true bill on any one of your multiple indictments, you typically go back to your supervisor and you say, look, we didn't make it here. And then it's the supervisor's call. Either you go back and the supervisor says, no, we're going to try again. We've got what we need here. Let's give it another go. Or you revise your strategy on the charges that you want to present. Because it was Lindsay Halligan, because she's the top in that office, there was no supervisor for her to go to. She made the final call, and she made the decision to present those 2 charges to the magistrate. And the grand jury never saw just those 2 standalone charges, and that might be a problem for her.
And we should also remind our viewers that Lindsay Halligan has never been a prosecutor in her entire history of being an attorney.
Yes, and that also seems reflective in what we've learned about what happened in that grand jury room. There's a couple of things she did that a prosecutor would know not to do. She was an insurance attorney in Florida. She defended Trump in some of his criminal cases, but a couple of things she did, she suggested, we don't have all of the evidence in front of you, but we'll show you. Just trust me that we have it, something along those lines. You can't do that when you're a prosecutor in the grand jury. You've got to show the goods, right? The other thing she suggested is that Comey would defend himself, that he would represent that this didn't happen, and he would come to court and say, provide evidence that he didn't do it. That's also not how it works. The government has the burden to prove beyond a reasonable doubt in any criminal case. And as most of you know, criminal defendants have the right to remain silent. And that continues through trial, not just when you're arrested in those famous Miranda rights.
Yeah.
So a couple of those mistakes seem to indicate her background lacking as a prosecutor.
So what is the judge going to do now? Where does this head?
He's called for more briefing on this issue about the validity of the indictment, and he brought Lindsay Halligan up, and she spoke for the first time at the podium and said, I just want to confirm the grand jury never saw the final indictment. And she said, yes, that's true. That may seem to indicate that we're heading towards invalidating the indictment, but we'll see.
So that would mean charges removed and therefore no trial?
Yes. Now, that might get appealed, and we might be back here talking about that later on.
But at least as it stands for what we're looking at right now.
That's a very real possibility.
Katie Barlow, Chief Legal Correspondent here at Fox 5. We appreciate the analysis.
Good
Thank
to
you,
be
Katie.
back with you.
Yes, so great to have you here in studio in the DMV Zone.